Afternoon, everyone. Hopefully this is working well and you could hear me. It's truly been an honor and a privilege to be the guest editor of the 38th edition of C21 Resources. Reconciliation, Healing Hearts came about as a response to growing concerns for how to respond to divisiveness, polarization, conflicts that are raging both within our own country and throughout the world. So many relationships have been fractured by wrongdoing, ranging in scope from the interpersonal to the international. In the fall 2023 issue of C21 Resources, then guest editor Brian Robinette curated a collection of articles that diagnosed polarization and offered practical guidance for addressing it. This current issue builds on that foundation by exploring the complex reality of reconciliation. When I first met with Karen and Lynn last fall about possibly being the guest editor of C21, I was extremely excited about unpacking the dynamics of reconciliation in a way that is theologically robust, intellectually accessible, and practically applicable to the lives of our readers. Working with the assistant editor, Justin Conway, we realized very quickly that there was a lack of substantive articles that grappled with the challenges of reconciliation in a way that was both relevant and accessible to our audience. It became apparent that this edition of C21 Resources would be offering valuable contributions to conversations about reconciliation and forgiveness. If you have not yet opened the magazine and read through it, you will find both original and previously published essays written from a variety of perspectives. The contributions offer prudential wisdom about reconciliation, whether it's understood collectively between God and humanity, individually between God and the individual believer, interpersonally, or socially between contentious parties or within warring nations. It is our hope that this edition serves as an academic resource for analyzing reconciliation, as well as a personal resource for individuals who might be struggling with whether or not reconciliation is appropriate in their own lives and what the practical steps to achieve reconciliation might be. So, as we begin our conversation on reconciliation, I would like to thank in a special way Father Liam Bergin for his generosity, not just in working on this issue in his excellent essay, but also his undying willingness to assist in activities like this, being part of the community and always helping out anytime I have any requests with regard to faith, peace, and justice. So, Father Liam, I truly appreciate you being here and part of this conversation. On a personal note, my mother is a huge fangirl of Father Liam when he celebrates Mass on Catholic TV. So anytime he's on, she's so excited. So I can't wait to when this video is going to be released and show it to my mother, and she'll be very impressed that I'm here with, as she says, Monsignor Bergin. So I'm really excited to be here and have this opportunity to chat with you. So shall we begin?
Let's go.
Excellent, excellent. So Father Liam, given your background as an Irish Catholic priest, the history of the Troubles in Ireland, as well as your scholarship as a sacramental theologian, how do you see these factors contributing to both your interest and approach to reconciliation?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is a great privilege to be here, and I just want to echo the thanks that's been expressed to Karen, Lynn, and all at C21 for organising this event and for the publication of this volume on reconciliation. Thank you, Josh, for all of that. I also want to have a shout out to the students in my Breaking Bread class who are here today, together with our Professor Diana Danforth, who is also, we're doing this Enduring Questions course together. Now, back to your question, or should I say 3 questions? I think 3 sneaked in there. Okay, the Irish bit, that's easy. Okay, when I came to the US 15 years ago, and living in Boston, and particularly if you're lucky enough to live in South Boston, as I do, people ask you what part of Ireland you're from. And everybody knows perhaps Cork and Kerry and Savage Donegal and other places like that. But when I say I'm from Laois, people just glaze over. Because it is, if I can say so, it is, pun intended, the dead centre of Ireland. Okay? I used to say it's like being from Iowa until I discovered I can't say that because Father Leahy is from there. But anyway, my parish is called Ahabo. It's a small parish with about 1,000 people living there. But at the heart of the parish, there is a monastic ruin. And it goes back to very early times. And one of the monks, one of the abbots indeed, of that monastery, in the year 743, decided to go for a walk, for a long walk. He ended up one of these Irish missionaries going down through Europe, re-evangelizing much of these lands. He spent 2 years with Pepin in his court, the father of Charlemagne. And then he ended up going to Salzburg in Austria today, where he became bishop. And there he promoted, as you've read the very first article in this edition, John Rodden speaks about how the Irish monks brought the practice of individual confession to Europe. And it was seen as being kind of a very easy way of celebrating reconciliation. Anyway, the bishops in Austria at the time didn't like it. And they reported by Virgil, as he's called there, or Fergal, as we call him, to Rome. But Rome decided that the Irish were right, okay? And the practice continued. In brackets, I went to Salzburg this summer and with my brother, and we saw the wonderful statue of Saint Fergal, which stands before the cathedral that he founded. And we traced all his steps. The one thing nobody had told us was that 2025 is also the 50th anniversary of the making of the movie The Sound of Music, which was made in Salzburg. And I think more people were interested in the Von Trapp family than they were in St. Fergal and his contribution to the sacrament of penance. Maybe that tells its own story. Anyway, as an Irish priest, not a monk, from that ancient parish with noble heritage, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, I celebrate the sacrament of penance, reconciliation, or confession, as you wish, and I cherish it. In my own contribution in this volume, I mention the fact that forgiveness is offered readily by God to all, to every man and woman, Christian or non-Christian, believer or unbeliever. Everybody who turns in their heart to God and desires to do what is true, what is noble, and what is just. Okay? Reconciliation is offered to all. And then I do note the particular privilege it is and can be to celebrate reconciliation in the sacrament of penance. And as a priest from this parish, I regret that at times this, what was originally seen as almost an easy access to the mercy of God, has become a burden for so many. You ask about the Troubles. I'm from the Irish Midlands, a good bit away from Northern Ireland. But allow me to quote John Hume. Some of you may know John Hume. In fact, last night I Googled John Hume and Boston College, because I imagine he's been here, but Mr. Google didn't come up with any responses. But I mean, Boston College in the US has played such a hugely important part in the bringing about peace and reconciliation in Northern Ireland. We just think of the senator from Maine, George Mitchell, and all the work he did. Anyway, there could be many quotations from John Hume. Allow me this one. Difference is the essence of humanity. Difference is an accident of birth and should therefore never be the source of hatred or conflict. The answer to difference is to respect it. Therein lies a most fundamental principle of peace and reconciliation: respect for diversity. I think we should probably broaden the conversation and bring Josh in. And the question I'd like to ask is, given your own work on peace building and the director of the Faith, Peace and Justice program, why is reconciliation so important?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Father Liam, for that thoughtful response and the invitation to reflect a little bit on why I see reconciliation as being essential. So let me just start by saying, I think at the most basic level, when we're talking about reconciliation, we're implying the restoration of right relationships between either people or individuals or social groups that have been alienated from one another. Reconciliation is so important because it offers us a pathway back to peace and a return to human flourishing. Reconciliation can be understood both as a process as well as an end goal. When we think of it as a process, it's not a standalone concept, but rather reconciliation must be connected to the pursuit of truth, justice, and forgiveness. As a goal, reconciliation doesn't simply mean conciliation or the coexistence of former adversaries. But rather, when we're talking about the fullness of reconciliation, it's the reestablishment of right relationship with God, oneself, one's neighbor, and all of created reality. So thinking about that idea of reconciliation, in terms of my own academic research, I focus on the importance of the Catholic Church as an agent of positive social change, promoting peace within post-conflict societies. I see Professor Lisa Cahill in the back, who happened to be part of my dissertation committee, so I just had to say hi while we're talking. And I'm deeply inspired by Professor Cahill's work on peace building and reconciliation. So thinking about these key insights for how Catholic theology can influence transitional justice, which specifically is how to reconcile a divided society or a post-conflict society within its own country, right? We could think that Catholic theology has a huge contribution to offer. When transitional justice first emerged in the 1980s, it was predominantly focused on statecraft and nation building. But what I've tried to broaden the category of transitional justice to think about what is the role of religion in the public square, and most importantly, what is the role of religious institutions in fostering nonviolence as well as reconciliation. A theological approach to transitional justice and peace building highlights the importance of speaking the truth, fostering forgiveness, promoting justice, and seeing reconciliation as a real, although limited, goal for post-conflict societies. While political reconciliation might be distinct from the fullness of theological reconciliation that I just mentioned, it does aim to restore people and relationships that have been harmed by political injustices. According to Daniel Philpott, political reconciliation should entail several key practices that look to build just social institutions, acknowledge the suffering of victims, the role of perpetrators, provide for reparations, punishment, public apology, and forgiveness. Very bold goals to try to achieve in a post-conflict society. Now, turning to my role as director of the Faith, Peace, and Justice minor, I think it's vital to promote reconciliation through nonviolent peace education. Peace education is not simply the acquisition of information, but also the formation of values and dispositions that enable us to become peaceful agents of social transformation. Our current Pope, Pope Leo XIV, has spoken often in his early pontificate about the importance of peace as well as peace education. And I'd just like to end by highlighting a quote that he gave us on June 17th of this year. He states, quote, "I hope then that every diocese may promote pathways of education and nonviolence, mediation initiatives in local conflicts, and welcoming projects that transform fear of the other into opportunities of encounter. May every community become a house of reconciliation where one learns to diffuse hostility through dialogue, where justice is practiced and forgiveness is cherished." So I would see those as sort of the key ways of thinking about reconciliation in my own work, both as director of the FPJ minor as well as working in transitional justice. So I've got another one for you. All right, another three-parter. I don't give just one question at a time. So, how would you describe contemporary attitudes towards the sacrament of reconciliation? And along with that, do you see any misconceptions about the sacrament that you'd like to address? And then finally, what do you see as the biggest obstacles to individuals embracing the sacrament of reconciliation?
Thank you, Josh. Well, to the first one, may I take a quotation here from James O'Toole's new book, For I Have Sinned, and the full title is For I Have Sinned, The Rise and Fall of Catholic Confession in America. I think he certainly catalogues the fall. And in one place he talks about parishes that they were discussing things that they need to change, or was it that might be possible to change. And he says they had categories from beginning to die, to dying, to close to death. And at the top of the close to death list was confession. Seldom does history offer an example of a practice undertaken for so long by so many that collapsed so quickly. The question, he concludes, is why? Why? Well, I think one answer certainly would have been the experiences people had in the confessional. It wasn't always positive. Oftentimes the priest, the confessor, was harsh and judgmental. I remember one time leaving a confessional in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome with my tail firmly between my legs. Okay? And Pope Francis has tried to address this. One of the wonderful quotations he has was, "The confessional must not be a torture chamber, but rather an encounter with the Lord's mercy, which spurs us on to do our best." And he was referring to confessors at that stage, not a torture chamber, but the celebration of mercy. The image of God has changed, thankfully. Okay, I think we had a very much an image of God as judge, the one who was watching the things we said and did. Our image of God now, particularly in the shadow of Vatican II, is very much one of a loving Father, and because of that, our sense of sin has changed. Kind of that scrupulousness that often accompanied the sacrament of confession, well, that's no longer there. And of course, the fire and brimstone homilies that now and again are still heard, but thankfully not as often as they were, they suggest to us, that we, again, Catholic theology makes the distinction between contrition and attrition. Contrition is where we're sorry for our sins out of love of God. What a beautiful thing, okay? Attrition is when we have sorrow for our sins because we fear the fires of hell. I think the heat has been turned down. People do not go to the sacrament of penance anymore out of fear, but because they want to be reconciled with God and the community that is the church. There also too was a kind of, many people will talk about the mechanical same old type of thing, that every time they went they found that they were repeating themselves and maybe focusing on kind of the peripherals as opposed to maybe the symptoms that oftentimes led to behaviors that may not have been healthy for us. In Boston, we must acknowledge that the child sexual abuse, with its epicenter here, and often linked to the confessional, that has had a huge impact. And I understand perfectly why some people would be very reluctant to be in a confined space with a priest. Then, are there misconceptions, you ask? Well, yes. First of all, the sacrament of penance is not necessary for salvation. Can I repeat that? The sacrament of penance is not necessary for salvation. Okay? Catholic doctrine teaches that the sacrament of baptism, either by sacramental or by desire, is necessary, but not penance. God forgives in many, many ways. The sacrament of penance, I do believe, is a very privileged way of celebrating it, but not the only way. Not the only way. Also, this sacrament is not a magic moment. Okay? It's not kind of a Superman thing. Okay? It is kind of part of a process of conversion, of reconciliation, and I think it's really important to see it as part of that, not as kind of an alternative. Okay? I had class this morning with my Engaging Catholicism group, and we spoke about the prodigal son parable. And when the son returns, and he composed the greatest, probably, hymn of self-hatred known. I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as your hired servant. And of course, as he comes home, the father is waiting. He sees him coming. He runs out to meet him. Now, running is not a very dignified pursuit for an elderly gentleman. That's my excuse anyway. But he runs to meet him, puts his arms around him, and he allows him to say it. I have sinned against heaven and against you. And then he puts a cloak on his shoulder, a ring on his finger, and sandals on his feet. The cloak that hides his nakedness, his shame. The ring that restores his belonging to the home. The family crest would have been on the ring. His sonship is restored. But the one I love most of all is the sandals. When he put on those sandals, he could leave again. His freedom was restored. So, dignity, sonship, freedom. And of course, that's something that we all enjoy as we are all created in the image and likeness of God. We are cloaked by God, okay? We are daughters and sons that are deeply loved, and we are free. We are free to follow God or to walk away. And you know, if that son had put on those sandals and gone away again, the father would have stood at the gate and waited for his return. I have to throw this out. At the heart of Boston, there is a wonderful shrine of mercy and grace. And it's at Arch Street. If you're ever afraid or nervous about celebrating the sacrament of reconciliation, go down there, because the Franciscans will embrace you with, like the father of the prodigal son. I can't promise you a cloak, a ring, or sandals, but you'll leave feeling all of those things have happened. I get you, do I? Okay. It'll
be hard to follow that up, though.
I quote, this quotation is attributed to John F. Kennedy. I forgive my enemies, but I don't forget their names. Okay? What gives you hope when you think about the daunting task of interpersonal and social reconciliation? And perhaps what do you see as the biggest obstacles to interpersonal and social reconciliation?
Excellent question. Thank you so much. And thank you for that beautiful reflection on both the misconceptions of reconciliation as well as the wonderful opportunities that are offered through the sacrament. So let me begin by thinking a little bit about the obstacles to interpersonal and social reconciliation, and then I'll conclude with what might give us some hope. So first and foremost, just to put my cards on the table, I'm not sure it's always possible to reestablish a relationship that has been fractured by wrongdoing. Reconciliation depends on who the parties involved are, the nature of the relationship, the magnitude of the harm inflicted, and whether there has been some form of redress to the wrongdoing. Additionally, I think under certain circumstances, reconciliation may not be commendable. Particularly, I think this is true if harm is ongoing or if there is no willingness to try to make amends for the past harm that has been done. Another issue that interpersonal and social reconciliation are sometimes conflated. For example, when armed conflict comes to an end, former adversaries need to find a pathway forward. Social groups might set aside their animosity towards each other to work towards a shared future, but this does not mean that individual members of those different social groups have reconciled interpersonally. They might still hold those harms and wrongs very near and dear to their heart. Similarly, I think there's a tendency to confuse reconciliation and forgiveness. As Steve Pope pointed out in his essay in this edition, forgiveness is the willingness to forego the desire to retaliate and forbear resentment toward the wrongdoer. Interpersonal forgiveness is always based on, interpersonal reconciliation is always based on the gift of forgiveness, but forgiveness may not always lead to interpersonal reconciliation. Lastly, we need to learn the skills and virtues that enable us to forgive and reconcile. I think there's a tendency to praise forgiveness and reconciliation without thinking about what do they mean? What dispositions do we need to have in order to engage in these activities? Again, I think education is essential for promoting reconciliation. Likewise, the church has a unique responsibility to cultivate these virtues that promote reconciliation. So let me offer a couple of points too about what I think gives me hope. First and foremost, I think that in order to think about the ministry of reconciliation and the work of reconciliation, you need to have an attitude of active hope. Hope is the virtue between presumption and despair. We cannot simply presume that relationships that were fractured by wrongdoing will magically be repaired, nor should we despair that there's no potential for forgiveness and reconciliation. I think hope is grounded first and foremost in our ability to trust in God's divine ordering presence that is active even in the midst of conflict or social unrest. Active hope is nourished by incremental progress, and it has a realistic expectation that there will be triumphs as well as significant setbacks and reversals. With hope and love, we are able to move forward. I believe that hope is born from the liberating truth that acknowledges the wrong that we've done, and that's a really hard thing to do, to be willing to admit when we've done something that is wrong, as well as the willingness to promote justice. Reconciliation is hope in a dream that is not yet fully realized, that past adversaries might in fact be healed by grace and through love have a transformation of heart. Now, concretely, where do I see these signs of hope? As a professor here at Boston College, working with the students, so many of you here in this room, is what gives me the hope that future generations can move beyond division and work towards promoting the common good. If you read the student voices in this magazine, I think they bear witness to this hope. They speak of the power of moral imagination, the importance of envisioning peace, the power of dialogue, the need to encounter the suffering of those who are vulnerable with a compassionate justice. Likewise, when I read the words of my fellow contributors, as well as your words, I'm reminded of the infinite love and mercy of God, who longs for us to be in right relationship with one another and all of created reality. I'm inspired to reflect critically upon the areas where reconciliation is most needed and how that reconciliation can come about. All right, real quick, Father Liam, I'm going to jump it back to you. Last word on the subject matter. What do you see as sort of the main areas in need of God's healing grace? And maybe that can lead us into our table talk conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Josh, for framing that beautiful answer in the context of hope. I mean, Pope Francis, when he inaugurated this holy year, he wanted to be a holy year of hope. So you've taken up so many of those beautiful themes. I think a great challenge we face is that we fail to forgive ourselves. We fail to believe that we are forgiven. And when we don't acknowledge forgiveness as a gift that's given to us, well, then we are almost unable to extend it to another. And we are all broken people. We're all sinful people. We do things that shame us. And yet, kind of when we come to terms with that brokenness, then we can be sources of reconciliation and healing for others. I don't know if you're familiar. I'm going to finish on this image. I don't know if you're familiar with the kintsugi art, where you repair a broken pot. It's a Japanese art where they repair a broken piece of pottery, and when they do so, they join it back together with beautiful gold lines. And the repaired piece of pottery is far more beautiful than the original. And I think that's kind of an image that I would like us all to own, that we who are broken and reconciled are more beautiful in God's sight, and also are more useful, okay, in God's world. Because again, these cracks that are gilded by reconciliation and hope, these become a source of energy and reconciliation in the broader community.